go ahead and we're going to get started. Last week I ran a little bit out of time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Has anybody got any prayer requests as we get started this morning or this evening? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you do for us, Lord. We thank you for allowing us to be able to come together tonight freely and safely. We thank you for your voice speaking into our life and giving us constant revelation. We pray over these. I pray over these people tonight. I ask that you give us ears to hear. I ask that you bless my tongue, that it only speaks the things that you want me to speak tonight. And I pray over all of our prayer requests, the ones that are unspoken. And I pray over any sickness that is in our family tonight. And I just pray wholeness and healing over our family. And thank you for all that you do. In your precious name, amen. All right, so I'm going to do a quick recap. We have a lot of new faces tonight that weren't here last week. So just very quickly before we get into, I guess, tonight's half of the message. Last week we covered kind of what I feel like is the introductory to where we're going tonight, and then also where we're going to be going as a family in the future. And so last week we spoke out of Ephesians 4 on the fivefold ministry, the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, pastor, the teacher, and how those five roles really function together to really bring a what I called an ordered flow of the supernatural from heaven into the earth. And, and each one of those has those functions. Paul says that it's a gift of Christ with grace to be the particular minister, the apostle, the prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher, right? It's very important that we understand how grace functions in the fivefold ministry. Grace, I told you last week, is the enabling presence of the Lord, the thing that allows us to do the thing we could not do the moment before we received grace. I've heard this before, and you can think of grace like a soda fountain or a Coke fountain down here in the South, right? When you go up to a Coke fountain and you look in the back end of it, it's a 5-drink Coke fountain. There's 6 ingredients. There's one common ingredient for all 5 of them, and you can picture grace being the soda water, right? And then you've got the syrup, and then the syrup and soda water mixed together to give you Coke or root beer or Sprite. It does not give you diet drinks. Those are the false apostles and prophets. I didn't come up with that. That was Chris Valadin. That's too funny for me. But I was like, that's really good. I'm going to have to use that one. So, like I said, it's that the fivefold working together. It's that ordered flow. The apostles and the prophets, they have a more heavenly, supernatural mindset. They're looking in the heavens and they're saying, hey, what are the God answers to earth's problems? And then they are working with the evangelists, pastors, and teachers who tend to have a more favor with us in the earth, right? And it's a beautiful picture, and we call it a culture of honor, where all 5 of the gifts are in the entire family. The saints themselves are honoring each other. They're honoring the gifts, and they've got this love and respect. And Pastor was talking about it Sunday morning as well. And Pastor talks about living under an open heaven, and this is the way that I can only see it is like when you have the fivefold pouring into your life, you live under the open heavens. And that's not to say that you can't have this outpouring of the Holy Spirit in your life and living in a supernatural lifestyle without it. You can. There's been many instances in history where not all 5 of the gifts are flowing into that move of the Spirit, right? And there's still a great impact that particular move had in the earth. The way that I could see it was, it's like Ruby Falls versus Niagara Falls. That's the way I saw it. And I was like, that looks really good. That's a really good picture there. I've heard it said before too. I didn't get to this part of my message last week, but my heart in this is not to cause us to start looking around and saying that person's that role or that person's that one, and because when you do that, you start emphasizing title over function, and then you get into this tidal wave where everybody wants to be called apostle something or prophet somebody because they're number 1 and 2 in the ordered flow, right? And they get this real hierarchy in their brain, like I did initially. It was like, I want to be that one. When in reality, it's the apostles and prophets are the foundation, and everything what all that they do gets built up on, and you never see it again, right? So that's why humility is very important. And all of the apostles and prophets I know of would rather just be called their name. They never want to be called that role. And so, but it's important to understand what that person is bringing into your life. It's important for us to understand that each person is going to bring a different type of message, because if we don't, then we're going to bring the wrong cup to the soda fountain. We're going to bring a Sprite cup to the soda fountain and try and get Coke, and it's just not going to work because I don't have Sprite to give you. You understand what I'm saying? So, again, it was definitely not my heart. It's just, it's an opening up of our eyes to say, okay, it's going to look different from person to person, and I've got to sit back and understand, what is this person trying to pour out into me today? And so that I can get my right cup and be poured into appropriately. And then also you have that role flowing into your life so that then you can operate that way when you need to operate that way. So my last statement was, we're in no rush, right? Pastor said it Sunday. I said it last week. Forget not the day of small beginnings. Start small in seed form, and then it grows. That's why it's important to root yourself in the things that flow versus becoming so focused on the things that fall. Pastor's talking about it Sunday morning out of Psalms 1. Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in that law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by rivers of water, so that he bears forth fruit in its season. I've heard this before, and I kind of tend to agree. It says that it bears fruit in its season, but I think we're called to bear fruit in all seasons. We may be in a winter, but we're called to be instant in season and out of season. And Jesus even cursed a fig tree when it didn't produce fruit when he was near it, and it was out of season for that fig tree to be producing figs. So I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself, but definitely getting ahead of myself. I did not have time to write my notes out like I wanted to, so I tend to write my notes out probably 2 or 3 times. I type them because I can type faster than I can write, and then I write them to get all of my thoughts semi-organized, and then I'll rewrite them in my other notebook down here, and they look a bit neater. So we're going to be struggling through this one tonight. But like I said, Pastor started talking about this Sunday morning about being rooted in things that flow. It's about being an inch wide and a mile deep, because you're tapped into something that's much deeper than you are, and you're drawing your nutrients from things that are deep within the ground. The wells that are in the earth, and there's a perfect picture of the Israelites, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and they relied on the manna that fell from heaven every day. They weren't tapped into the river that they were right there beside. And, then you get those, was it 9.5 of the tribes go across, Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh stay back. Is that right? I get those. I know Gad for sure. But those 2.5 stay behind, and the others go across, and they are able to live in the fullness of what the promised land had to offer. And there's no real difference in the east side of the river versus the west side of the river. There's not a big, huge topography or geographical difference there. The land probably looks really similar. Just thinking about going down there to the Pascagoula River, swamp on one side, swamp on the other. So, my compromise today would be my children's bondage later. I wrote this down. One generation's compromise will become the next generation's captivity, and we see that the picture when Jesus crosses over into the region of the Gadarenes and he encounters the demoniac there. And I guess some people say one demoniac, some people say multiple, but regardless, it's in the region of the Gadarenes or Gad, in that area where he and that tribe made a decision to stay behind and not cross over, and it became the next generation's captivity. And I believe that's what's happened to the American church. We've settled, or previous generations have settled for what's for manna called church attendance. And now we see this divorce really between, can think of the supernatural and God and Holy Spirit and all of that as being dad, and you've got church attendance as mom, and mom got all the children. And so now you've got effectively an entire generation that is unchurched, fatherless, and they really have no knowledge of the supernatural for the most part. And that's why you see this huge, I read this months ago, I want to say that it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of my generation don't even attend church anymore. That is an insane stat, and it's because their parents went to the church that their 3 generations ago went to and helped plant that church, and they settled in just the typical church model where it's 3 songs, a 3-point sermon, and a prayer, and you get out the door and you go eat lunch. Maybe you get invited to go eat lunch with the pastor or something. You hit it big time there. But and I've heard it numerous times through my life. I was like, why do y'all not go to church or something? I was like, well, my parents just went to this church, and it's a waste of time. It's a waste of an hour and a half on a Sunday morning when I can be off doing something else that's more productive. And you put those quotations around that, and you have 2 different definitions of what success looks like. And I can understand that. I was at a point in my life where I was looking at the same exact thing. You get in these stale spots in the spirit, and you're like, man, here it's 3 hours on a Sunday morning, and you're like, goodness. But and that leads me into my next thing is where does this go? What is this leading us into? And I through my life have read the Bible very literal in a sense, and that I see when I first got this idea, I actually read back through the Synoptic Gospels, and then I read through Acts, and then I would read sprinkled in throughout the epistles. But very literally would read, Jesus had 100% success rate in healing the sick and doing signs, wonders, and miracles whenever the people had the faith to do it, and they didn't make him commonplace in an area. But we're ultimately called to be kings and priests in the earth. And the fivefold is that entry point into there, and it's to be able to serve the family. I talk about the family, it's the church family. It's to be able to serve the family well, and get the family healthy, so that the healthy family can get the sick family well again. I knew this was going to happen tonight. I've struggled with notes all week, and that's why they're on this yellow notepad here. What Abba is showing me right now about George County and about Lucedale, and then you hear about the stories of this church, and what's prophesied over it. This is the small beginnings. This is our core group that will be here, hopefully, in 10 years when this thing balloons out and explodes. That's what I'm prophesying now, right? And in that time means nothing. It can happen tomorrow if Abba wants it to, right? So what he is starting to show me is that I said this last week, we have to exhibit mastery in the simple things, the foundational things, so that then he can use us later on to impart those foundations into the people that are coming into our church. You look at all these empty seats in this church tonight. We are prophesying that these seats be filled in the coming years. But it can't simply be on the shoulders of 5 people that lead this church. There's going to be multiple pastors in this church that are going to be overseeing this family and shepherding them with excellency in mind. And that's what the fivefold does. That's what the entry point, and where we have to exhibit we have to perfect those simple things first and exhibit faithfulness in the small things so he can trust us with the big things. And the big things are not what's in mind, and it may look completely different. It may not be numerical success, but it may be hearts, and it may be getting this church to be a healthy point to where then we are moving outside the 4 walls a lot more than we are now. And we start affecting Central, and then we start affecting Lucedale, until we get to the county, until we get to the entire southeast part of the state, and it just continues to grow. I talked about Adam and Eve last week. Said Abba gave them governmental authority over a small place called Eden, and he expected them to expand. He expected them to be fruitful, multiply, and as their capacity for governmental capacity increased, he expected them to subdue the earth around it and to expand Eden. That was his goal, and that is our commission. His original intent, which was Eden. And he says, this is Eden, and now, increase our governmental capacity, and then we start expanding Eden until the whole earth, the knowledge of the glory of the earth covers the knowledge of the glory of the Lord covers the earth as the waters cover the sea. That's the goal. So, and I'm way off topic. I'll say being connected to the apostolic and the prophetic in particular kept me here. And I told you I've started seeing things about George County and about Lucedale and even the surrounding areas. But that's what kept me here. I was looking, particularly me. Kennedy would have followed me wherever. She looks at me to be that guide, and I was looking to get out of Lucedale and get out of this. We were looking at leaving the church, honestly. And I had a few series of dreams and visions that held us here. And And so we made the decision to, for the lack of better terms, marry the city, marry this church. And I submitted myself to serve in this church. And I will say that that's made all the difference for me. Even the prophetic led Mary and Joseph around for years to provide protection over Yeshua. Joseph had dream after dream telling him to get out, get out, get out, because somebody's fixing to try and kill all the babies in the land. Mary the same way. Think about you just weirdly have a human growing inside of you and nobody offers an explanation of what happened. That's what I said in my notes. I said, having the gifts, each of the gifts flowing into our life enables us to have heaven's perspective over our life so that we can lead and shepherd our families with excellence. All right. We'll get back on my notes now. I think I'm back on track now. So where this is going is, I said I read through the Synoptic Gospels, and I saw a pattern is that immediately he comes out of the wilderness. First thing he does is he starts calling his disciples, the then called disciples, right? He calls it's a mix, right? He doesn't call just a bunch of fishermen. He calls a mix. There's a tax collector, there's fishermen, there's a physician, maybe, right? There's a political zealot. It's a political official. So he called, and I also think that when he called Peter, he called Peter's wife, and I also think children. I don't have any biblical proof about that, but why in the world would a bunch of youngins be hanging around these weird men all the time? You'll read it several times. There's kids always around Jesus, so I mean, that kind of thing is weird, just random youngins coming up around this old dude, and you're like, what's going on here? But they had to have had a family. It had to be a family environment, right? So for 3.5 years, I have, again, no proof of this, but Yeshua pours into these 12 families, and what the Father's intention for them was in the earth. And then he tells them to go to the upper room, and he says, pray and wait for, the Holy Spirit to come. And that's the empowerment that Abba intended us to live with before the fall of Adam and Eve, a family seated on thrones of government authority in heaven to rule and reign in the earth. And so I'm going to go into Acts 2, and read a couple little spots in Acts. This is probably my most favorite part in all of the Bible. So after Peter steps out, preaches to the 5,000 or 3,000, whatever that number is, we'll start in verse 42. Every believer was faithfully devoted to following the teachings of the apostles. Their hearts were mutually linked together with one another, sharing communion and coming together regularly for prayer. A deep sense of holy awe swept over the people, and the apostles formed many miraculous signs and wonders. All of the believers were in fellowship as one body, as they shared with one another what they had. Out of generosity, they even sold their assets to distribute the proceeds to those who were in need among them. And daily they met together in the temple courts and in one another's homes to celebrate communion. They shared meals together, and with joyful hearts and tender humility, they were continually filled with the praises to God, enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord kept adding to their number daily those who were coming to life. Similar statement over in Acts 4. I'm going to have to get over there. My eyes aren't nearly as good as they used to be. Starting in verse 32, and all the believers were in one mind and one heart. Selfishness was not a part of their community, for they shared everything they had with one another. The apostles gave great powerful testimonies about the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great measures of grace rested upon them. Some who owned their houses or lands sold them and brought the proceeds before the apostles to distribute to those without. Not a single person among them was needy. For example, there was a Levite from Cyprus named Joseph who sold his farmland and placed the proceeds at the feet of the apostle, and they named him Barnabas, or encourager. So that's I guess the original intent post death, burial, and resurrection, and setting up the initial church was family, a huge family. And I wrote this down, and I'm going to implicate myself a little bit, but it looks like family, and it can't mean that we're gathering once or twice a week. We're going to start losing connection with each other if we're only just talking to each other once a week. You know, if I only talk to my wife once a week, probably not going to have a wife very long, right? So it's organically. We crave the community of each other and the presence of one another, and talking about it. What's going on in our lives, and you know, we say it all the time, iron sharpens iron. And so that organically, them acting as family, organically had the church grow. People were craving something to belong to. That's the church growth model. And so there, you know, I just said there has to be more. It can still be once or twice a week in this setting, right? There's got to be something more, even if it's just a group message between everybody. It's like, hey, what's going on this week for you guys, or just anything for that matter. Just some way of keeping in contact and in fellowship with one another. It can mean lunch or dinner at each other's houses. It doesn't matter. Just anything. But one of the interesting things is that these two passages kind of introduces a new standard for tithes and offering. Back in August or September or so, I started talking about tithes and offering up on the platform and how it looks different now. I didn't have all of my theology around that kind of shored up yet, so I kind of backed off on it a little bit. But, you know, again, after the death, burial, and resurrection, it gets a facelift. And we hear everyone was selling the things they didn't need, the things that somebody else needed. It was like, hey, I don't use this here. You know, there was a community amongst each other, and because of the actions in the hearts towards giving in the family, I don't find anywhere where the apostles were ever begging for money. I did a Google search and it was like, did they ever ask for money? No. So the family was so connected to one another that they took it upon themselves to give their excess away. So inside of the framework of family, giving, the idea of giving gets raised. I did not come up with these terms, but it kind of reminds me of the idea of trade and leverage, where we can look at the tithe as trade. What do I have that I can give back? And the connotation of trade and leverage is it's non-burdensome versus the tithe. And when you think about the tithe, not initially, but what it eventually became was something that was burdened to the Jewish people, in my opinion. Could be wrong. But they had to give certain tithes to cleanse themselves, or, you know, when they did something wrong, they had to go give an offering to the priest, or this or that or the other. I mean, it was just burdensome, the tithe and the offering in the Old Testament. And so on this side, I think it looks completely different, in that I'm not given to get a curse off my life. The curse is off my life. So now I'm giving because the Lord's given so much to me. I'm like, I want to give it all away now. You have to have a heart for giving. And so where this came from was we went to Apostle Aaron's in Mobile, the Rock of Mobile. It's a different name now. We were with Damon Thompson that night, or that weekend. And these crazy folks throw money on the ground while they're preaching. And they call it their leverage. So when they would say something really clever, they'd chunk a wad of money on the ground. And it was a bunch of ones, but Damon said, Damon said, y'all throwing a bunch of ones on the ground. He said, but you're really going to find out how wealthy you are when those things start turning into 20s. He was bargaining for a little better of an offering that night. But it made sense in my head the way that they talked about it. And I'm not saying we're going to throw some money on the ground out here. If y'all want to, then by all means. But it made sense to me. It's like I'm giving away those. The Lord's giving something to me. I'm going to give what He's given me to the family. What I don't need, I'm going to give back to the family. And then leverage is a totally separate thing. It's really cool that Apostle Aaron and them had that revelation where they're immediately, what they called it, immediately sowing into that word they heard. They don't wait on it. They're just like, hey, that's cool. I'm going to throw $1 into, immediately sow into that word. And so thought that was really cool. But the whole idea of our tithe and our offering is that I have something to give, and now I'm going to give it away. The Lord has blessed me through the years with, I guess, a talent of music. I said drums in my nose, but in reality it was, I guess He gave me rhythm, and I picked the drums up first. The reason why I talked about the diversity amongst the apostles was he needed all of those different roles. He needed somebody to administrate the finances or do this or that for him or that ministry. So do we. But we also, I said it a lot bigger, we need doctors, we need lawyers, we need engineers, managers, financiers, we need nurses, teachers, welders, electricians. We need all of those gifts we need, and we need saints to be in those roles. It's important because you're going to encounter somebody out there on your job that I'm not going to be able to in this church or sitting behind the pulpit somewhere. Right? Pastor's talked, I cannot tell you how many examples he's given of where he's been, welding somewhere in, I guess, early on in his career and talking to, his helper or somebody else on the job site and getting, the Spirit of the Lord coming in a moment and wrecking the whole situation. I've had several instances, even in just my engineering career, and most recently, we're starting up our unit, and all of a sudden, the unit trips because my motor failed, and it took us like 72 hours to figure out what was going on. But I went down there one morning, my second or third 16-hour day, and I went out there in the switchgear that morning, and I walked in there and I just put my hand on the switchgear, and I was like, what's going on? And in 45 minutes, we found out what was going on. And we were back up and running again for a short period of time because we tripped again in a few hours. And that was another really cool story, is the Lord is really interested in your job. And He wants to show you things in your job and how to excel in your job. And so I would rather have a doctor operating on me that if something goes wrong, that doctor can get a word of knowledge in a moment or a word of wisdom and fix what's going on the operating table. Ain't that right, Gene? We need kingdom people in the earth. We talk. I hear some discussions on a 7-mountain mandate where the saints are in. I don't want to say the wrong word because there's two words, and they don't want it to be one, they want it to be the other, and I don't know if it's infiltrate. I don't think it's infiltrate. But because I can't remember what it is, we infiltrate the 7 spheres of influence of society, and government, music, media. I don't know all 7 of them, but you get the picture. Every aspect that we have a hand in society, we would rather have the kingdom people infiltrating that particular sphere because it brings heaven's influence into that culture. So Abba placed a unique gift in you so that you could multiply that gift and offer it back to him as an offering of worship. Operating in your gift or form of trade in the earth is an offering of worship to the Father. Doing your job really, really well is worship. It's an offering to the Father. So, I'll tell this story. I've got plenty of time, it seems like. When I was, my mom says, roughly around the time that I was 18 months to 2 years old, I would start taking out pots and pans from under the cabinet, and I would place them like a set of drums in the house. I think every 2-year-old does that. But she says it was like a perfect set of drums right there, and I would use lids for my cymbals, and I had the unique naming convention for them. We won't talk about that. But, that was, I think it was about 2 or 3 years old I got my first set of drums, and I vividly remember we would come home from Riverside and immediately jet to the shed, and I would replay that morning's set of songs and what I thought was the right way to play it, right? And then, at the age of 8, I started playing on the worship team at Riverside on Wednesday nights. My first service was a weekend where Brother Hansi was there. And the main drummer, she was sick. And ML was actually playing heap nights of the week. And then Scott Loftus, a lot of y'all know Scott. Scott came and just sat by me that night when we got at church. He was like, "Hey man, ML ain't here tonight." He's like, "I need a drummer." And I was like, "Uh-oh." I'm tinkering around with Scott in the studio behind his house. That is totally different when you have to play in front of people. And he told me, he said, "We're going to play Days of Elijah, and that's it." And I was like, "All right, I can do that." And so we play that night, and then, subsequent weeks, I joined the worship team there and played on Wednesday nights. And then we moved here a couple of years later. We had a drummer, but we didn't have a bass player. So I was like, "Hey, I'll go learn how to play bass. I love music. I'll just go learn to play bass." And our first service in this new building, back when it was the small side, when you go out there to that photo book, I'm actually sitting on the platform playing my little red bass. And then, a couple of years later, our drummer leaves, and I'll just move over there, and Josh Cochran starts playing bass, and then Dylan joins shortly thereafter. And, it just seemed like every time there was a need, I always was like, albeit I didn't have the right heart about it, I was like, I'll go serve in that spot. I guess that's one of the things that my parents taught me was that serve. And I didn't know until a couple of years ago that what I was doing was actually worship. A lot of people will talk about, I had to get away from doing such and such in the church because I was just running out. I was getting dried up. And I've never had that experience where I was like, I feel empty, like I don't have something to give anymore. I always felt like, I didn't know it at the time, but I always felt like I was, fine, this is my worship. And when we would go to worship conferences back when I was 7th, 8th grade, the church would send us up to Lendell Cooley's up in Nashville at that worship conference. And I felt like I didn't know how to worship because playing the instrument was my worship. That's how I grew up understanding how to worship. And, when I stepped down from the drums back in 2014 or something like that. I think that's when I went to Mississippi State. I still would come home every now and again when Jaron left and would fill that void we had there for so long when in between Jaron and Gary and Pam coming, and then Christian came with them, and I was like, I don't need no drummer now, and I'm gone. And so not here to toot my own horn or anything, but you have to have and develop this idea that what you're doing is worship. A lot of people won't do things in the church because they're like, oh, this is an added task. But when you see everything you do as worship, then you get to that place where you continually meditate, you're continually praying, you're continually worshiping the Lord. You've got to have the heart that says, what I'm doing right now is worship. And I'm going to do it to the best of my abilities because he demands excellence from me. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this girl was talking about this little cool company she's got going on right now where they do prophetic reports for people, where if I was to buy this prophetic report, they would give me a number. That's what my case number is. And they would say, hey, this is a male case number, and then give it to all the people on the prophetic team there. And as part of the prophetic reports is it gets proofread for grammatical errors. She said, because it's important to be excellent in our grammar and presenting this back to such and such person. And I was like, that's really cool. You know, the Lord demands our excellence in every aspect of our life. And so one of the things that I wrote down, wanted to talk about was the idea that he gives bread to the eater. What I mean by that is you look at the story where he gives out the talents, and dude number one multiplies his 5 into 10. The next guy, his 3 into 6. The one guy over here takes his 1, and he just like, I'm going to keep my 1 because I don't want to lose just the 1. And he doesn't multiply it. So I started with drums. I learned bass. I learned live sound production. I learned, went up there and got Whit to teach me how to do the live stream. I do things that help me with my teaching. Could probably do more. But again, it's about taking what he's given you and cultivating the field for a greater harvest. He didn't give you the talent of whatever and expect you to spit that back to him. That's a poor investment strategy. Think about it. I'm not going to go put in money in a savings account that gives me 0.001% interest every month. I'm going to go put it in the Roth IRA that gives me a lot more. So that's what he expects from us. He expects us to take what he's given us and then make sure that we put it in good ground, make sure our heart's prepared for what he's given us, and then he expects us to tend the field for a great harvest. And then, I don't even think I'm near my notes, to be honest with you. I'm okay. What I was saying, you got Whit and Amber that run the sound. They teach children's church. What other hats does Whit and Amber that they wear, and they never complain about it? It's because they see their time as worship to the Father. They see their time as an offering to the Lord that they'll never be able to give again. So we have to change our idea of worship, and that worship is absolutely the least definition of worship. It happens right there on a Sunday morning. It's the bottom of the barrel of worship. And it's great. But you've got how many more hours in a week that you've got to float? I worship when I go to work every day and I do my job and I do it really well. And so I'm worshiping when I'm sitting on the couch with Isaac in my lap watching Paw Patrol. Think about that for a minute. I'm worshiping when I'm sitting at the ball field in the boiling sun watching my kid play a sport. That's a totally different concept that we've never had. Is that being dad, being mom, and doing it really good is worship. I wrote this down a couple of months ago in my journal, and I said, Yeshua was a carpenter, and probably, in my opinion, the best carpenter in the Middle East for approximately 25 years. I'll give him 5 years to be a kid. That's what I'm going to estimate. At 5 years, I said, I'll give him 5 years to learn how to use the tools of his dad. Yeshua took longer to learn the craft of carpentry and present that work to others than he did to present the image of Abba in the earth in what we would call active ministry. I'll fight anybody that says he only ministered on the earth for 3.5 years, because he ministered every day of his life by how he bore the image of the Father as a child to Mary and Joseph and as a craftsman in the gift of carpentry. And so it's I'm always challenging myself in what I've been given. It's like this year I'm sitting for my professional engineering license. I don't know how much I'll ever do with engineering again, to be quite honest. The Lord's starting to talk to me about some other things in my life. One of the things I wrote down is how we bear the image of Christ in the earth. It says more about the value we place on worship than anything else that we do. And this is the standard that he called us to live in, is to reveal the Father in the earth. Christ came to the earth, revealed the Father, and now that's what we're supposed to do. He called us to do the same thing. He said, I've showed y'all the bare minimum of what's possible, and now here's the keys. Go. And he said, make disciples of all nations, and heal the sick, save the lost. And so when there's still childhood cancer in the earth, it hurts my heart to know that, hey, there's a kid that died from cancer and didn't find healing. And the Lord said, and I know there's no sickness in heaven. So I've got to reconcile that in the earth. And I really believe that there's going to come a point in time where there's no sickness in the earth. Because sons and daughters have taken on the responsibility to say, if it's not in heaven, it's not going to be in the earth. You know, that's what I walk around with every day. There's one of my, it was my mentee. He's a friend now. He's a little Indian kid. He grew up in Birmingham. His family actually came from India. They're Hindu. And so when I was told, like my first year there, was like, hey, you're going to mentor this kid. I took him out to his on-site visit. We took him to Burkett's Steakhouse. And this boy does not eat meat. And there's nothing on the menu that doesn't have meat. Even their salad has meat in it. And so we're purely embarrassed that night. But, and this kid ain't worked a day in his life. Green as green gets when you talk about labor. But the mindset that I had to constantly keep was, I'm here to reveal the Father to him. If he never converts from Hindu to Christianity, but he understands, hey, that's real Christianity, then I've done my job. My job is not to convert him, especially when the litmus tests aren't there, when he's not even ready to even hear it. But seed here, seed over there, a little bit of water, some fertilizer every now and again, and you never know what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years from now when we do what the Father's called us to do in the earth. And so I don't have much else tonight. I want to say that I'm fairly close on time. A couple of minutes left. I knew tonight was probably going to be a little different from my notes, or where I wanted to go with my notes. I literally just struggled throughout the entire day, and I was like, all right. It's like, I understand. I'm just going to talk from my heart. And, you know, this has been something that's been inside of my heart for months. And even the last time, or 2 times ago that I spoke, I was already had these notes going down in my computer. And I talked about something completely different because it just simply wasn't time yet. And I really was encouraged Sunday morning when Pastor started talking about what he was talking about. And then the previous Sunday morning, he was talking about hearing the word of the Lord and the prophetic. All of these things are really important because they build the body up. And it's my heart. I want to see Lucedale look like this huge red spot on a map. When you look at, like, if you were to just look at a map called "Where's the Spirit of the God Moving?" There's a red spot in South Mississippi, and it's in Lucedale at the corner of 26 and 63. That's what I want. And then I want that red spot to start growing year after year after year. And I want Lucedale to be this place where you come to get healed, and then we're sending sons and daughters out into the earth to affect their cities or their metrons. That's my heart is. And so, Sandy, do we want to pray now or do we want to wait? It's about 5 till.